Welcome back to the Liz Wheeler Show. This week on the road. We're not the only ones on the road this week. President Trump visited Valdosta, Georgia in the wake of the landfall of Hurricane Helene. The devastation down there is almost unimaginable. We're talking not a 100-year storm here. We're talking a 500-year storm. They've already said over 100 people are dead, and that's only those who have been accounted for yet. I expect that number to increase probably significantly as rescue crews make their way into the more remote areas that have been devastated even more. So $100 billion is the estimate right now of how much damage has been caused by this storm. Again, I expect that number to significantly increase. President Trump's visit to Georgia comes 4 days after the first landfall of Hurricane Helene in Florida. And then, of course, the hurricane made its way across the other southern states of the United States. Compare that for a moment as we begin this show today. Compare that to President Biden, who took over a year before he visited East Palestine, Ohio, after the train derailment that devastated that Midwestern city. 4 days it took Trump, over a year before President Biden visited people who had been harmed. You can also compare that to Kamala Harris. What did she do this weekend? Kamala Harris spent her time in San Francisco, liberal heaven, San Francisco fundraising, while people in the southern United States were facing something that most of us never have to face, these natural disasters of epic proportions. And this is of course San Francisco. Kamala in San Francisco was after she spent Friday at the southern border in the state of Arizona wearing a $65,000 necklace from Tiffany's. I don't know if you guys noticed that, and a fake Zelensky style military jacket to visit the border crisis to make herself seem tough on the border against illegal immigration. Meanwhile, in the southern United States, we have 2 million people without power. 2 million towns that have been completely washed away. Over 30 people who have died because of this died in Asheville, North Carolina alone, which is why I expect that number to increase. Severe flooding caused this. The devastation of these areas is like almost nothing we've ever seen before. And the question that I want us to ask today is, who's going to help them? Who's going to send aid? Who's going to help them rebuild their lives and their homes and their cities and their schools? Who is going to send help? Well, according to President Joe Biden, it's not going to be him. It's not going to be the federal government. When a journalist asked Biden if he had aid to send to those harmed by Hurricane Helene, this is how he responded. Take a look.
Do you have any words for the victims of the hurricane?
Yes, it's tragic. As a matter of fact, we're trying to get the exact number. My FEMA advisor is on the ground in Florida right now. There's a distinction between the numbers that FEMA's used and the ones that are used by the locals. So it really is amazing. You saw the photographs. It's stunning.
It's unbelievable.
It really is.
Such a wide area.
And we've given them all everything that we have. We're on the ground ahead of time, so we're working hard.
Are there any more resources the federal government could be giving them?
No, we have pre-planned a significant amount of it, even though they didn't ask for it yet. Hadn't asked for it yet.
Are there any more resources the federal government can give these people? The journalist asked. No, said President Biden. No, there's not. Meanwhile, I will have you note, $2.7 billion was just approved by President Biden's administration, which means Kamala Harris, to go to Ukraine. $2.7 billion going to Ukraine, but $0. We have zero resources left for the people of Asheville, North Carolina, the people of Valdosta, Georgia, the people in Florida. This is, of course, long-term military aid, $2.7 billion. In short-term immediate aid, there's $375 million that were just given by the Kamala Harris-Joe Biden administrations to Zelensky after he came here to the United States and toured a munitions factory and did a de facto campaign event with Kamala Harris. That's how much money she gives him. How much money is Kamala Harris giving to the people in the southern states of the U.S.? No aid left, Joe Biden says. There's been $60 billion total given to Zelensky in Ukraine since February of 2022 when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. $60 billion. Consider how far that money would have gone to rebuild the southern United States. But no. Maybe if North Carolina and Valdosta, Georgia renamed itself Ukraine. Maybe if they called themselves pro-choice abortionists. Maybe if they pretended to be illegal aliens. Maybe if they said that their primary ideological bent was transing kids or keeping pornographic books in school, supporting Black Lives Matter rioters torching our cities. Maybe then Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would actually give them a dime to rebuild their cities and rebuild their lives. But they're just American citizens. They're just conservatives, families living in red states in the South. And so Joe Biden and Kamala Harris give them nothing, no aid left for them. By the way, guys, Did you see that President Trump posted the St. Michael prayer on X? St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. He posted, the president posted, may God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the other evil spirits who prowl through the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. President Trump obviously posted that because he obviously watches this show and he saw that we were doing this and he's joining us in our effort to recognize the reality that what we're facing in this country isn't just left versus right, it's good versus evil. We are engaged in spiritual warfare, whether or not we acknowledge it. And so, of course, we should acknowledge it so that we can emerge victorious in this battle. We're going to talk about this actually more later in the show because, of course, it sparked an outcry. The left said he's pandering to Christians, which he may be, but I'm not opposed to it. And Protestants said, you're praying to saints. And this caused just an enormous outcry. It was trending all over X. So we're going to talk about what it actually means when Catholics ask for the intercession of saints and angels later in the show. I think you're going to like that, given that President Trump has joined us now in this prayer. Okay, so the story of the day and the based take on it is the real reason that Kamala Harris visited the southern border in Arizona, the critical message that she sent to us, to voters, and the one thing that has changed in our country significantly in 4 years since President Trump ran against Joe Biden in 2020. It's time for us to say goodbye, by the way, to uncomfortable sheets that we've been sleeping on our beds for years. It's time to get yourself Cozy Earth's best-selling bamboo sheet set. I have this on my bed at home, and I absolutely love them. My raving is sincere and genuine because they're the only sheets that I like to use. They're made from 100% premium viscose from bamboo, so they're both soft but adult, if you will. They're like silk sheets, but not as slippery, jersey sheets, but not as college-y. They're wonderful, and they get softer every time you wash them. Cozy Earth is all about turning your home into a personal sanctuary. And that's certainly what's happened in my house where I use Cozy Earth sheets. And just in case you're on the fence, all Cozy Earth products come with a 100-night sleep trial, which I love because it shows me that they're confident in their products. If they thought their products sucked, then they wouldn't offer that because they'd know we'd all return it. But they're confident, so they offer that. Your peace of mind matters to Cozy Earth. Make a wise choice this election season. Embrace the comfort of Cozy Earth, and you can feel the difference. Go to cozyearth.com/Liz right now. Use my promo code Liz for an exclusive discount up to 40% off. That's a pretty significant discount just for you. That's cozyearth.com/Liz. Use my promo code Liz for 40% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, say that you heard about Cozy Earth from this show. Health insurance, my friends, is very confusing and expensive and frustrating. I was just talking about this with my husband the other day because it infuriates me how much I pay for health insurance premiums every month, especially when you add it up cumulatively, how much you pay every year, and what benefit do you get from it? Very little if you do health the way that you and I often do our own health care. Many things, claims are denied if you don't go through the route of big pharma and these big hospital systems. These claim denials are becoming very, very common. The statistic, in fact, is 1 in 5 Obamacare claims were denied last year. That's just unacceptable. The headache of health insurance is exactly why Crowd Health was created. It's not health insurance, it's a better way to pay for healthcare through crowdfunding. Through crowdfunding for $175 if you're an individual or $575 for a family of 4 or more, you will get access to a community of like-minded people like you and I, who are willing to help each other out in the event of an emergency, a healthcare bill that's astronomical. You'll get access to telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, and so much more without hospital networks getting in your way. And of course, you'll be part of the crowd, a group of members just like you who want to help pay for each other's unexpected medical events. Let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. Get started today for just $99 per month for the first 3 months. That's a good deal. Go to joincrowdhealth.com. Use my promo code Liz. The mandatory disclaimer is Crowd Health is not technically insurance. You can learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. Use my promo code Liz. Okay, so the story of the day today and the base take on it is this. Kamala Harris visited the border in Arizona on Friday, and her border visit sent a critical message to us about this election. I want to start by saying we are in a different situation today than we were 4 years ago. And what I mean by that is 4 years ago in 2020, when it was Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, voters were polled about which topics, which issues were most important to them. And back in 2020, immigration and border security ranked only 9th on the list of most important issues to voters, 9th. That's not incredibly significant, 9th. Well, fast forward to this year, to 2024, and border security and immigration are cumulatively fifth. But if you look at the actual numbers, it's very close to the most important issue to a plurality of voters in this country. In other words, running your campaign on border security and immigration 4 years ago was not it. It wasn't enough. It didn't push it over the edge. The biggest difference this year is that people on both sides of the aisle, this is Republicans, Democrats, and independents, understand that the mass migration that we're seeing at the southern border, the permissiveness, even it's not even just permissiveness. The Biden administration, the Kamala Harris administration invited this crisis to happen, deliberately put policies into place that exacerbate this. They want this to happen. They understand that this is an existential crisis for multiple reasons, from the perspective of our national sovereignty, from the perspective of the fabric of our nation, from the perspective of the safety and security of our neighborhoods, whether it's drug trafficking, violent crime, what have you. And they understand that it's a crisis when it comes to these people, whether they be legal or illegal. And we'll get into this distinction in a minute and explain exactly why the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration label certain people as migrants versus illegals. We'll talk about that in just a moment. They understand that the goal is to naturalize those migrants to make them voters in US elections to secure a Democrat victory. So all of this is to say is Kamala Harris's visit to the Arizona border was important, and she had to do it because she recognizes that people this year compared to in 2020 understand that the border crisis is one of the top priorities of American families. So Arizona specifically, why did she go to Arizona? It's a very close state. It's a swing state. It could go either for Donald Trump or for Kamala Harris. But it's very important for you and I to note that Trump should win in Arizona. Now, I'm not trying to count chickens before they're hatched. I'm not trying to cross a bridge before we get to it. But it's important to note that Trump should win in Arizona if everything holds steady, because us expecting Trump to win by looking at the numbers and acknowledging reality is also how we diminish chances of cheating. And what I mean by that is there's a margin for cheating. If Donald Trump is winning in a state that's incredibly red and he's winning by 10, 12, 15 points, then the Democrats can't plausibly cheat in that state, because we'd all say, well, how is it that Donald Trump was polling 15 points ahead and then Kamala Harris won by 3? That's not realistic. It has to be a very, very narrow margin, basically either a Trump victory or a Kamala victory plausible in that state for the Democrats to be able to cheat and take that victory away from Donald Trump. So it's important now for us to note that the state of the race in Arizona should lead to a Trump victory. And let me explain to you the history that leads me to that conclusion. Going back to early August, Donald Trump has been leading, or at least tied, in every single poll between he and Kamala Harris in the state of Arizona. The New York Times poll has Trump leading by 5. The CNN poll has Trump leading by 5. Two very important polls, not just because they're prominent news outlets, but because they tend to be biased towards Kamala Harris. So if they have Trump leading by 5, then perhaps he's even leading by more than that. The Real Clear Politics polling average for Arizona has Trump leading by 2.2. That's obviously an average of all the different polls in Arizona. Now, why this is very important is because back in 2016, when it was Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump was about 2.25 to 2.5 points ahead of Hillary Clinton in the Real Clear Politics polling average. He ultimately won Arizona by 3.5 points. So he won by a margin greater than what the polls were predicting that he would win by, even though the polls predicted that he would win in Arizona. So in Arizona in 2024, Donald Trump is either in the same position or a little bit better position than he was in 2016 when he won Arizona. So why did Kamala Harris go there? Well, she went there to try to close that margin, to make it plausible for cheating. She went there because she couldn't avoid the border anymore, because it is so critically important as an issue to voters, not just Republican voters that she can dismiss and ignore, but independent voters that she needs, and even a percentage of her own Democrat base. So it is a campaign stunt. But do not be fooled by Kamala Harris at the border. The fact that Kamala Harris wore a $62,000 Tiffany's diamond necklace and a fake bomber jacket actually tells you all you need to know about Kamala Harris at the border. But Kamala Harris has repeatedly, openly, honestly, and I say that kind of joking, kind of not, argued for amnesty for illegal aliens for a long time. In 2019, for example, when she was running for president in the primary against Joe Biden, she campaigned on, quote unquote, pathways to citizenship for at least 2 million illegal aliens. Comprehend what that would mean, the implications of that. That would mean 2 million people who came to our border or across our border would then be voters in our elections. Now, of course, the Democrats feel that they own illegal aliens. They feel that they are entitled to the votes of illegal aliens, even if those illegal aliens have temporary protected status or are asylum seekers who are technically here legally. They feel that they own those votes because they can simply use fear-mongering tactics and essentially blackmail. They can say, we will protect you from deportation if you vote for us, but if you vote for a Republican, that Republican will deport you. And they feel that based on just that, they could secure the vote of illegal aliens. And honestly, they probably could. They probably could. That was in 2019. Fast forward to this year. In her DNC nomination acceptance speech, Kamala Harris repeated this euphemistic advocacy for amnesty for illegal aliens. She said she wanted to create a, quote, earned pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens. An earned pathway to citizenship. What does that mean? Well, she doesn't want to talk about the details because what it means is giving these migrants the same right to vote that you and I have. But Kamala Harris doesn't want you to talk about this. And the reason that you know that she's trying to hide this from you, the way that you can tell that she's being deceptive is because she refuses to admit these two facts that I just presented to you. Her 2019 policy stance on amnesty and her DNC nomination acceptance speech policy stance. If you ask her campaign today about amnesty for illegal aliens and where Kamala Harris stands on that, they refuse to answer. Now you could ask yourself, why are they refusing to answer? If she stands for this policy, you'd think she'd be proud of it. You'd think that she would want people to know about it. She's not actually wanting to represent her voters. She's wanting to push her own ideology. We do know that our country is being ideologically transformed. Tens of thousands of violent criminals have been let into our country. In fact, here's the data released last week. This is according to ICE, so our own government statistics. Under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, the U.S. has released into our country 13,099 murderers. Free in our neighborhoods now. 15,811 released rapists. 425,435 convicted criminals in total released into our cities and towns and neighborhoods. 350 terrorists or those suspected of having ties to terrorism. And that doesn't even include, those numbers of criminals don't even include the 325,000 children who have gone missing after being released into our country. What happened to them? Are they now being subjected to essentially child slave labor? Are they part of child sex trafficking rings? These are valid questions that the Kamala Harris campaign doesn't want to answer because she doesn't want people to know her stance on legalizing illegal immigrants into our nation. So we know, of course, going back to the thesis of this, Kamala Harris visited the Arizona border because she's panicked about losing that margin of cheating in the state. She knows that voters care about the border, but we know, you and I, what Democrats want to happen at our border. But we know what the Democrats want. They want illegal aliens to be voting. They want the fabric of our nation to be changed and to import a different culture than American culture. They want our systems to be overwhelmed, whether this is the public school system, whether this is the welfare system, whether it's our healthcare system. They want them overwhelmed. They want to ensure through these three things their own political power and ultimately to topple our system. This is the Democrats' ideology. This is the policy platform that undergirds all of, or this is the ideology that undergirds all of Kamala Harris's border policies and all her behaviors. And once you understand that, everything that she does or says regarding the border makes sense. So I want to talk specifically about the migrants who are eligible for naturalization. And what I mean by that is there is a distinction between an illegal alien and a migrant who is here temporarily or otherwise, at least under some legal heading. An illegal alien is someone who crosses the border, jumps our fence, isn't supposed to be here. They are considered an illegal alien. I generally use the term illegal alien to refer to almost all of the people who have crossed our border in this border invasion. Because the Kamala Harris-Biden administration have these different technical terms for these migrants, these aliens that come to our nation, if you are not an illegal alien, they want to create what they call a pathway to citizenship. What that means right now is of the people who have been part of this migrant invasion in our nation, who come to our border and claim asylum, even though they do not qualify for asylum, but the Biden-Harris administration has changed the definition and people just make up stories to try to come here pseudo-legally. Because of that, there are currently in our nation 9 million migrants, aliens, who are eligible for citizenship eventually. If you are eligible for citizenship, then you will be eligible for voting in our elections once you have obtained that citizenship. In fact, you can tell that this is the left's plan. This is not just me observing it, although it is observable. This is not me just analyzing, well, what kind of sense do the Democrats' actions make if not for this? It's not just that. There is a group, funded by George Soros, who has been naturalizing hundreds of thousands of individuals, at least 250,000 of them, and their goal is to continue to naturalize these migrants and make them into voters. Spencer Lindquist, a reporter at the Daily Wire, reports it's called the National Partnership for New Americans, and this is how it describes itself, quote, a national multi-ethnic, multiracial partnership network of 60 of the country's leading immigrant and refugee rights organizations. Guess how much money they've received from George Soros' Open Societies Foundation? $560,000. $560,000. Okay, this is an enormous part of their overall revenue. They've had a revenue of $4.1 million in 2023 alone. That's a lot of money. And George Soros is paying for that because his goal is the same as Kamala Harris's. He wants to change the fabric of our nation, overwhelm our systems, topple our country, and he's using the border invasion to do that. Think about Springfield, Ohio, for example. Put the eating of the pets aside for a moment and think about the experience of the residents of Springfield, Ohio, once these 20,000 Haitians were brought into their neighborhoods. What happened? Their systems were overwhelmed. All of a sudden, there were all these non-English speaking students in school. Their housing was overwhelmed. Residents, American citizens in Springfield couldn't rent housing because it was being rented by the cot to Haitian migrants that were here, not technically illegally. They were under temporary protected status from the Biden-Kamala administration, which means that Kamala and Biden actually want to naturalize these migrants into citizens. And think about what would happen if all of these migrants became voters of Springfield, Ohio. They would almost outvote the American citizens that were in Springfield, Ohio before they were. This would change the demographics, not just of our cities, but of our congressional representatives ideologically, and tilt it almost entirely to the left. So then we come back to Kamala Harris down at the Arizona border. What are the words that she used? She said she wants to advocate for a more orderly process of migration. Now, at first, this sounds good because what we see at the border is chaos. Order versus chaos is what we're supposed to think about. And we want more order at the border. But what Kamala Harris means when she says she wants a more orderly process, she doesn't mean that she wants to prevent migrants from invading our border. She doesn't mean she wants to stop this mass migration. What she means, as she wants it to be an easier and quicker process, less confusing for the migrants to get here, a more orderly process for them to come into our nation and become citizens, not to wait in line. But she wants her goals to be achieved in a more orderly fashion than the chaos that's begetting so much attention at the border. And this comes back to what I mentioned before, this distinction between technically legal versus illegal. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Under the Trump administration implemented the Remain in Mexico policy. The Remain in Mexico policy forced migrants who claimed that they were asylum seekers to wait in Mexico until they were given a court date and their asylum claim was processed, either accepted or rejected. But they couldn't cross our border until that court date. And that resulted, of course, in many people stopping claiming asylum, and it resulted in people who had falsely claimed asylum not being allowed into the United States. It was a good policy and an effective deterrent. Well, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took office, they rescinded the Remain in Mexico policy. They re-implemented the Barack Obama policy of catch and release, which is you come into our country, you claim asylum, we give you a court date, and then we let you walk free into the cities and towns and neighborhoods of the United States of America. A huge percentage of those people never show up for their court dates because why would they? There's no enforcement mechanism. There's no incentive for them to do so. There's only risk of being deported. But if they're just illegal aliens wandering around the United States, there's really no risk of deportation unless they commit a hideous crime. And even if Kamala Harris was the prosecutor, there's not really that much risk of deportation in that particular situation. So again, when Kamala Harris means an orderly process, she's talking about a process that would be less confusing for migrants and would more quickly turn asylum seekers into naturalized American citizens who could be voters. What Kamala Harris means is not that the deluge of mass migration and illegal immigration is bad. She doesn't mean that we need an orderly process to secure our border. Her goal is to make it easier for these illegals to become citizens and voters. That diamond necklace that she wore from Tiffany's, that fake Zelensky-style bomber jacket, they're a perfect illustration of what Kamala Harris is, a fake elitist with zero moral compunctions about hurting you, harming our country, even causing harm to the very migrants that she wants to use to cement herself into power, to cement the Democrat ideology into our neighborhoods, into our government, into our countries, and into our country and into our home. She is completely insulated herself from real harm, as long as her goal of overwhelming our system, violating our sovereignty, changing the fabric of our nation, and cementing the mass migration of illegals into voters is achieved. She simply doesn't care. And her visit to the Arizona border proved that to us once and for all. JD Vance and Tim Walz are set to debate. The vice presidential debate is tomorrow. I'm excited for it. I like that sort of thing. I think JD Vance is going to do well, but this is what I'm looking for from JD Vance. This is what I expect for Tim Walz. Also, don't kid yourself. The future of the Supreme Court is on the ballot this year. The radical left wants to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own hand-picked justices in order to get the political outcomes that they want. Even President Biden has gotten in on the act by making reforming the court one of his final priorities before he leaves office. But don't be fooled, my friends. Their end game is really just plain old court packing. At First Liberty, they call this assault on the court what it really is. They call it a Supreme Court coup. These extremists just want to get the outcomes they want. They don't care about an independent judiciary. The frightening thing is that come January, their plan could become our nation's reality. Simple majority votes in the House and the Senate, combined with the president's signature, could turn their plan to pack the court into the law of our land. This is why they're sounding the alarm at First Liberty. This is why they need you to join them. If we take action together, you and I, if we unite our voices, then we can put a stop to the radical left's plan to take control of the Supreme Court. As the 2024 election approaches, we need to do three things. First of all, we need to find out where each of your candidates stand on the radical issues of packing and purging the court. Then number two, we need to share what you learn with everyone you know. And three, do your civic duty and vote. Those three things are critically important to the future of the court. Preserving it as an independent judiciary, it's literally in our hands, yours and mine. It's a great responsibility. If we lose the court, we lose the country. That's why First Liberty is taking action. They need all of us to join them. With patriots like you standing for the Supreme Court, we can safeguard the independence of the judiciary just as the founding fathers intended. And by saying no to the Supreme Court coup, we can secure the blessing of liberty and protect the future of our constitutional rights for ourselves, our children, and our children's children. So go to supremecoup.com/Liz. That's supremecoup.com/Liz to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. All right, JD Vance and Tim Walz are set to debate in the vice presidential debate tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to it because I really enjoy these types of events. I think JD Vance is very good at debate, so I have high hopes for him, but I also have just a little vein of cynicism and skepticism that runs, just a little one, guys, that runs through my veins. And I always have higher expectations for people than they end up performing in these debates. But here's what I expect from Tim Walz. The most important thing, of course, for JD Vance is to understand Tim Walz's strategy, to be very familiar with Tim Walz's record, to understand what voters care about, and to make sure that voters who are watching the debate come away with knowledge of what Tim Walz actually stands for. So Tim Walz's strategy is to avoid answering questions. We know this because a CNN journalist asked him about it at a party and reported that his plan was to just avoid answering questions. You can watch this video.
Even last week, I was in New York at a fundraiser that Tim Walz was doing at an apartment there, and he said, after I left the room, I heard he said to someone who asked, how's debate prep going? He said, look, I was trained as a teacher. As a teacher, we're trained to answer the questions. We tell our students to answer the questions. That's not what this is. So Walz really trying to fit himself into this somewhat awkward always thing of a nationally televised debate.
Well, that should be insulting to us, to you and to me, that Tim Walz won't answer our questions, that he's deliberately trying to avoid answering the questions. It also shows that he has nefarious motives, ulterior motives. If he doesn't want to tell us the truth, why is that? Because he doesn't want us to know the truth, because he's trying to be deceptive and implement policies, impose policies on us that we don't want. So JD Vance has a very simple marching orders from me. Be disciplined about your messaging. Do not stray. Do not try to be Donald Trump. Do not try to have some persona that is unnatural to you. Just be disciplined in your messaging. What you want to do is highlight Tim Walz's record. He's actually, J.D. Vance is fortunate because Tim Walz is a governor, which means that he has legislation that he has signed into law that he is directly responsible for. This is not something they're like, well, the majority of this and that in the legislature. No. Tim Walz is responsible for everything that he's signed into law. So what he should do, what J.D. Vance should do is essentially use Walz to punch and pivot to speaking to the voters. For example, Tim Walz doesn't want to answer questions. Well, J.D. Vance should pose him yes and no question after yes or no question. Like, for example, he should say, Governor Walz, yes or no, did you sign a piece of legislation into law that denies medical care to babies born alive after botched abortions? Yes or no? Now, the answer to that is yes, and J.D. Vance should highlight that after Tim Walz bloviates, and he should also say, why aren't you telling the voters the truth about this? This is awful. 5 times a year in the state of Minnesota, babies who are alive are born and struggling for life on those tables, and doctors and nurses are denying them care because of your abortion agenda. You signed it into law. Every single issue, he should pose a yes or no question. Governor Walz, yes or no, did you sign a bill into law that allows children to seek transgender surgeries, transitions from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones to genital mutilation surgery in the name of the transgender ideology in your state without parental consent? The answer to that question is yes. And when Tim Walz bloviates, J.D. Vance should say, why are you lying to voters? Is it because you know that this is horrendous and you don't want people to know about it because they won't like it? He should make the point, J.D. Vance should make the point he wants to make to voters and just use Tim Walz as a punch and pivot to the point that he wants to make. He should say, Governor Walz, did you or did you not sign a bill into law that prohibits pornographic books from being removed from school libraries? And then J.D. Vance should read a portion of the book Genderqueer, which is the pornographic book that is always in these elementary schools. He should read it aloud and say, you prohibited this from being removed from a school library. Yes or no? And he should make Tim Walz own it before making the point to voter. And you can do this for everything from Black Lives Matter to Ukraine to the border, issues that voters care about. J.D. Vance should also, if the moderators are incredibly biased, he should highlight their bias, but not in the way that he seems like he's bickering with the moderators. He should not dignify the moderators with the response of bickering, but he should highlight it. He should say, I reject the premise of that question. It's incredibly biased. I want to talk to you about what's important, what voters care about, and then he should reframe the question to make the point that he wants to make. So call them out, hold them accountable, but don't bicker with them. If J.D. Vance does those things, if he stays disciplined, he stays on message, he doesn't try to be Donald Trump or embody a persona that he's not used to, he uses Tim Walz to pivot and punch, he highlights Tim Walz's very radical history and record, which is undeniable, then he should do very well in this debate. I'm excited for it, and I think that he can win in the eyes of the voters. I know that there's a history in campaign strategy that says a vice presidential running mate doesn't make or break an election, and there's truth to that, but Tim Walz is so radical, and Kamala Harris embraces so much of what he's done that it's hard to run away from it, and it's really a good messaging mechanism for Republicans to highlight to voters just how radical Kamala Harris is, because she often offers up word salads versus the undeniable record that Walz offers by signing these legislations into law, or these pieces of legislation into law. All right, a couple of headlines from today. John Kerry had some choice comments about free speech. Take a look at this.
And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact have kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go, and people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities.
Yeah, independent
in order
thought.
to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just hammer it out of existence. So,
oh my word. So when he says build a consensus, he means manipulate you. He wants to manipulate you into thinking the way that he thinks, believing what he believes. And how dare you engage in any independent thought by looking for fact checks and facts themselves outside of his mainstream sources. This guy is evil. This is the same guy, by the way, who wants to ban you from flying on private jets while he owned one himself. And when he was called out in a congressional hearing for owning a private jet while wanting to prohibit private jets from you from flying on private jets, he goes, well, I didn't own one. It was my wife's. Yeah, okay, bro. Way to try to wiggle out of that one. No recovery. He wants to abolish the First Amendment. He doesn't want you to have a right to speak your mind. He doesn't want me to have a right to speak my mind. He wants this to be criminal because he has dubbed it disinformation because it somehow stands in the way of John Kerry imposing his globalist agenda on all of us. And I think I speak for you as well as me when I say we're very proud to stand in the way of John Kerry's globalist agenda. Now, Tim Walz went to a sports game this weekend, and let's just say he did it obviously to pander, to do his whole I'm a normal Midwestern dad thing, which is ridiculous and cringy. But when he went to this sports game, he got booed. Take a look at this.
Oh yeah! Trump 2024, baby!
Is he flipping them off? So someone said Trump 2024 and he flipped them off. Well, that doesn't surprise me. It's a little shocking because it's so vulgar and disrespectful. And remember when they told Trump that he wasn't presidential enough? Well, this guy, they want to be the vice president. But that's actually what he thinks about it. I'm glad he did that because it shows us exactly what he will do if we have an opinion different than the Kamala Harris, Tim Walz opinion. He will legally, judicially, legislatively, executively flip us off. No, thank you. All right. The Biden administration used a taxpayer-funded email list through Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, to praise Kamala Harris. It is a de facto campaign email for Kamala Harris that they use your money and my money to pay for, which is against the law. Anybody who had signed up for information on Medicare received this email. The Biden administration was just talking about their own accomplishments, but they pointed, when they said who's responsible for these accomplishments, they pointed to Kamala Harris. Let me tell you, we should not be letting the Biden administration and Kamala Harris, who controls Biden, obviously, get away with this. If we look at this email and we say, well, this is a taxpayer-funded email that's supposed to be non-political, you used it to campaign for Kamala Harris, that is a violation of election law, we should hold them accountable for that because it does make a difference. It does impact the outcome of the election. They are violating the law to do it. That is cheating. It's illegal, it's unethical, and yet Republicans like to sit here and be outraged about it because it is outrageous, but what are we going to do about it? How are we going to actually hold them accountable for it? And to that I would turn to the red state prosecutors who have constituents who have been actively harmed by this law-breaking behavior. Please start prosecuting Democrats who actively violate the law. Otherwise, they're going to keep doing it. And those are the headlines that I have for you today. My final point today, Joe Biden is so demented in the most recent video that he's almost unrecognizable. We're going to get to that in just a second, but Donald Trump posted the St. Michael prayer that you and I say together every day to start the show. This created a firestorm on X, both because Donald Trump seems, in the wake of the first assassination attempt, to have had some sort of spiritual awakening. It's a prayer I say for him every day, that he is drawing closer to God, that he's recognizing his own mortality, not just in the earthly sense, but in the eternal sense as well. I hope and pray for him that he fulfill the mission that God has for him on earth, and that he recognize that we in this country are engaged in spiritual warfare. Something that's very important to you and I know, to recognize that, to acknowledge the reality of it. But of course, it also sparked that same firestorm of Protestants saying, why do you pray to saints? Why are Catholics asking for the intercession of angels? And I wanted to replay for you a conversation that I had with apologist Joshua Charles about this very question. So enjoy.
All right, so you guys know the most controversial part of my show on Monday was the St. Michael prayer that I had the most comments on the episode. And I'm talking on YouTube, on X, on Facebook. You guys left me about 1 billion comments about the St. Michael prayer, and it's about evenly divided. The people that watch the show are like half Catholic, half Protestant. So we had the nice, head-butting of don't pray to saints. We're not praying to saints. We're asking for intercession. And I said, listen, guys, the reason we talk about religion just a little bit, we're not a religious show per se, but religion underpins everything else. I mean, we are trying to order our country to allow everyone to order their own lives, to know God, love God, and serve God. And so to that end, I said, listen, let's have an apologist, a scholar, a Catholic convert on the show to talk about why do Catholics pray to saints, quote unquote. So Joshua Charles joins me today. Joshua has become a friend in recent months. You probably have seen his viral tweets on X breaking down pretty complex Catholic doctrine into a digestible form for the everyday. I don't know if people that doom scroll through X are everyday people, but we are of a particular breed that likes this kind of nerdy stuff. Joshua, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Liz. It's an honor to be here.
All right, Joshua, I'm just going to start with this very open-ended question. I want to hear your answer to it. Why do Catholics pray to saints the way that I said the St. Michael the Archangel prayer?
Yeah, well, big topic, and we'll have a post on X about it so people can go into more details. But the short version is that the saints are part of the body of Christ. And as Paul is very clear in 1 Corinthians 12, no part of the body can say to another part of the body, I do not need you. If you apply the body analogy to our own bodies, when we start running or we're, needing to endure through some sort of exercise, our lungs are telling our heart, hey, I need more blood, I need more oxygen, I need more, and it's all, of course, under our brain and submitted to our nervous system and our soul ultimately. But it's not because the lungs and the heart are apart from our brain or apart from our soul. It's that they need each other. And that's essentially what the saints are part of our Christian family. And, when I was a Protestant, and I want to be clear with, Protestant viewers, I understand where they're coming from. I was a Protestant for 31 years of my life. I think there are totally valid questions about this. I think Catholics get very frustrated with the blatant misrepresentations that go on, and those frustrations I think are oftentimes fair. But I understand where their concerns are. They're concerned about idolatry. They're concerned about taking away credit from Jesus, right? And so I get that. That itself is a valid concern. I would simply say that the Catholic faith is so Christocentric. It's so centered on Christ that it sees Christ in his members, which is what Scripture tells us about. It says Paul even says we are members one of another. And as I said, that one part of the body can't say to another part of the body, it doesn't need me. And so, I don't need you. And so when I was a Protestant, whenever somebody would die that we believed was in a state of friendship with Christ, we would say they're with Christ. They're with Christ. Now they're with the Lord. They're home with the Lord. Paul says to be absent from the body is to be with the Lord. And so it's just strange to me since becoming Catholic, you hear so often, well, they're dead. You'll hear a lot of Protestants say that. Not many, but not all, but you'll hear some. They're dead. You can't pray to dead people. That's necromancy. But that's simply not what Scripture says. Scripture is very clear that to be with Christ, to be absent from the body is to be with Christ. And to be with Christ, how can you claim that you're dead when you're with Christ when Christ is very clear, I'm the God of the living. I'm the God of the living. And we see this, in the book of Apocalypse, sometimes called Revelation of St. John. We see multiple places in chapter 5, chapter 6, chapter 8, where the prayers of the saints are being offered to God by the saints who are in heaven. So there's two fundamental parts of the church. Well, you and I as Catholics know there's three. We won't get into the third part, which is purgatory. But
we will in a future episode.
Yeah. But there's the church on earth and there's the church in heaven. There's the church that we're still struggling with sin and this sorrowful life, this vale of tears. And there's the church that is passed on to be with Christ, that is absent with the body, but is with the Lord. And since he's the God of the living, they are part of our Christian family. Those who are part of the body of Christ are constantly commanded to pray for one another. And so when you're with Christ, you're alive, and you're part of his body, there's absolutely no reason why your command to pray for the rest of the body would no longer apply to you. Absolutely none. In fact, we see in places like Apocalypse 20 as well, there are saints who are martyrs for Christ. And it says they rise in the first resurrection and they reign with Christ as priests. And so these are people who have died. Apocalypse 20 is very clear about that. But then they rise in the first resurrection, their souls, and they reign with Christ. So how can you reign with Christ, but you can't pray for the other part of your family that is still going through this vale of tears on earth? It just makes no sense. And, one of the things that played a huge role in my conversion, as many people know about, is I started reading the ancient church fathers. And my confirmation saint is St. Ignatius of Antioch. I call him affectionately St. Ignatius the Red Pill. And he was ordained by the apostles. He was I believe, the second bishop of Antioch after St. Peter. And he's writing about AD 107, and he was saying extremely Catholic things. And we'll get into that in another episode perhaps. But my point is, when reading the Fathers, I saw that this practice of intercessing, asking the saints for their intercession, venerating their relics, it was absolutely everywhere. It was absolutely everywhere. And in fact, it was often the pagans themselves. I was told this practice was pagan, but it was often the pagans themselves who hated this belief and this practice. I actually had a quote I wanted to read. I posted it earlier, but this is, well, I won't say who it's from. I'll just read it really quick. He's referring to Catholics, you have filled the whole world with tombs and sepulchres, and yet in your scriptures it is nowhere said that you must grovel among the tombs and pay them honor. Was that by a 16th century Protestant reformer? No, that was by Julian the Apostate, the Roman emperor, who tried to revive paganism between AD 360 and AD 363. He, as his name aptly says, he was an apostate from the Catholic faith, and he hated this practice. And you can find numerous other examples. Theodoret of Cyrus, in his A Cure for Pagan Maladies, he refers to the pagan attitude toward this belief and practice and says they mock it. They think it's ridiculous. And in fact, you can find all these miracle stories of the relics of the saints, meaning their physical remains, not only from the earliest days of the church being preserved and put under altars. Now, why would they be put under altars? Also from the book of Apocalypse. You see an altar and you see souls under the altar, and they're saying to God, they're seeing the state of the church on earth, and they say, when will you bring vengeance for our sake? Because they were martyrs. And so, since ancient times, Catholic altars have often had relics of saints beneath the altar. And that comes straight from the book of Apocalypse. And so, but the pagans hated this. But many church fathers, St. John Chrysostom, St. Augustine, many others, they talk about miracle stories being wrought by these relics, demons fleeing or miracles coming about. I was just in Milan, and I saw the relics of St. Ambrose, who helped convert St. Augustine. And I was at the very baptistry where St. Ambrose baptized St. Augustine, two of my great heroes. And it was just amazing to be there. But we see the relics of St. Ambrose, and he was next to the relics of two other martyrs. Before I left for Italy a few weeks ago, I had actually read this very story where St. Ambrose had found the relics of these two martyrs who had been martyred about a century earlier. And St. Augustine was there, and he brings out the relics, and these relics start bringing about miracles. St. Augustine talks about it in City of God, I believe book 20. And he talks about all these miracles brought about by these relics. One of them was that a blind man was able to see. And so now why? They would attribute it to the prayers of these martyrs. And sure enough, these two martyrs are laying right next to St. Ambrose to this day. It's got a poetic quality to it. And so
it is. It's fascinating. Let me interrupt you for one sec, because I want to make sure that we get all of these questions. So some of the comments you already addressed, and that is, why are you praying to dead people? Well, okay, you addressed that.
Sure.
The other part is, where is this found in the Bible? You're addressing that. The third thing that there were many comments about was the idea of a mediator. A lot of Protestants were saying there's only one mediator, and that's Christ.
Yep.
Can you explain the difference between a mediator and an intercessor? Because I feel like that might be either misunderstood or just some Protestants aren't aware of that difference.
Yes. So if we accept that the saints who have passed from the body and are with Christ, if we accept that they're alive, if we accept that they're in heaven, then the question becomes, well, are they being another mediator? Often the verse that is cited, I think it's 1 Timothy 2:5, where it says Christ is the one mediator between man and God. But this is about the incarnation. Christ is the one mediator in the sense that he's one person with two divine natures, and that he has broken down the wall of separation in his own body between Jew and Gentile, between male, female, we are all one in Christ, all that sort of thing. That was through the incarnation. And so that's what that verse refers to. Now, if Protestants want to claim that verse applies to prayer, asking saints to pray for us, then they themselves are in a horrible bind, because I know Protestants ask each other to pray for each other. So if mediation refers to intercessory prayer, then Protestants themselves don't have a leg to stand on. So that's really not the issue, is mediation in this case, because that it doesn't refer to intercessory prayer. The issue is, are the saints alive? Are they in the presence of Christ? And the other issue is, why would a saint in such a state, why would their prayers be more valuable than, say, even my prayers or your prayers? The answer is very simple. There's no sin in heaven. Scripture is very clear about that in many, many places, including, again, the book of Apocalypse. The book of Apocalypse was traditionally interpreted as God revealing to St. John, like the full nature of the church, especially in heaven, and also the struggles of the church on earth, what the Catholic Church calls the church militant and the church triumphant. And so we see all throughout Scripture that, as James says, the prayers of a righteous man avail much. We see that with Abraham. We see it with David. We see it with Moses. And we see it with the saints. And so it's the mediation argument is really, frankly, not an argument. It's very lazy.
So one of the things that I've been doing this week, we relaunched the show this week. This is the third episode. We came back Monday, we did Tuesday, today is Wednesday. After, when I finally lay down, got the kids in bed, everything in the house is good and neat and tidy. I've been like doom scrolling through the comments and the responses for each of these episodes, and I cannot wait.
That's always healthy. That's always healthy, Liz.
I know. I used to not
soul.
do it as much. I don't doom scroll through my X feed as much anymore because that's mostly like, you're a bigot, you're an extremist. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'm like a stay-at-home mom that talks politics. But I cannot wait. The point of this is I cannot wait to see the responses. Like, guys, I want to hear your responses to this. I want this to be an ongoing conversation. This is interesting to me. Clearly, it's interesting to you. And also, I don't know if this is an admission I should be making while hosting my own podcast. I don't often have a lot of time to listen to tons of podcasts. So I'm not a regular listener to any one podcast. But there are two podcasts that I almost never miss an episode of, and one of them is yours. Your podcast, Eternal Christendom, is my new favorite podcast, and I'm not saying this just because you're on the show. Like, we're friends off the air. We text about this. Like, it's really good, guys. It's really, really good. I highly recommend that you go and subscribe to that. It's on YouTube. It's on. Yeah. He just got started. You have 3 episodes maybe, but
Something
they're long
like
form,
yeah.
so they feel like more than than that. Go subscribe to that. It's called Eternal Christendom, and it's exactly this kind of conversation, but even longer and even more in depth. Joshua Charles, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz.
All right, one final point before we go today. Who is the president of the United States? I know technically it's Joseph R. Biden, but who is the real president of the United States? Because when Joe Biden dropped out of the campaign saying he would no longer seek to be elected in 2024, he didn't just drop out of the campaign. He seemed to drop out of the White House. He seemed to drop off the face of the earth. When you listen to what Joe Biden says, he's not just offering word salads and incoherent gaffes. He seems to be completely senile, completely demented. For example, Joe Biden was asked this weekend whether he had any comments about the recent military strikes in Yemen. And instead of answering about military strikes in Yemen, he seemed to answer about union strikes instead. Take a listen to this.
Mr. President, will you deploy more U.S. troops to the Middle East?
Mr. President, has Netanyahu gone too far?
Any comment on the strikes in Yemen, Mr. President?
Both sides have got to settle the strike. Support the collective bargaining effort. I think they'll settle the strike.
Both sides will work out the strike. Yikes. What? Joe Biden is senile. He's mentally demented. He's totally out of it. He has no idea what he's saying. I almost feel sorry for him, except that he has dedicated his life to such evil, and the manifestations of that have harmed so many people that I know and love. But the real question politically is, who is the president right now? Who is the real president? Who is running our country? If the president of the United States is incapacitated, then the person running the country would be the vice president. The vice president of the United States currently is Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is running the country. That means everything from the border invasion to the war in Ukraine to inflation and the price of gas and groceries to the Biden administration supporting the UN resolution last week that will usher in a global vaccine passport that you will be required to adhere to. All of that belongs to Kamala. It's hers. She owns it. She's controlling Biden. The buck actually doesn't stop with him. It stops with her. Kamala is the one harming our country, hurting you and your family. Joe Biden is demented and he's senile. He's not the real president. And let me tell you, we all know it. Joe Biden is simply not with it anymore. Kamala is the one pulling the strings because she wants open borders. She wants global forever wars. She wants astronomical inflation. She wants transgender kids and abortion until birth. She just doesn't want you to know it. And so she still hides behind poor Joe Biden. Don't be fooled, my friends. And that is my final point. Thank you for watching today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us through the tech glitches. We are on the road this week with the Liz Wheeler Show. You can subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. You can subscribe to it on youtube.com/Liz Wheeler or on blazetv.com/Liz. We'll see you tomorrow.